The Polish government has said they'll be strengthening the border with Belarus to protect against any Wagner troops that might now move to the country. Well, let's now speak to Kristine Berzina, who is the German Marshall Fund, from the German Marshall Fund, a non-partisan think tank, and focuses on geostrategic analysis within Europe. Thank you so much for joining us here on BBC News. Let me ask you first of all, how has Prigozhin and what's happened over the weekend changed the status quo in Russia, especially in terms of Putin and his power?
This was a major shakeup for the Putin regime. If there's one thing that most took for granted, both in Europe and the US, as well as, for example, in Beijing, it was a sense that there's stability and longevity in Russia, in Moscow with the Putin regime. You like it or not, he's been there, he's going to stay there. And suddenly, with this mad dash towards Moscow that was stopped 2 hours away from Moscow, there was a sense that there's instability possible in Moscow, that the Putin regime doesn't have to live as long as Putin does, and there are other options. And right now, President Putin is desperately trying to do cleanup, to change the narrative, to downplay what happened, the vulnerability of this past weekend, and yet the cracks are already there. Are these fatal? Are they not? It's unclear, and I don't think we're going to know anytime soon. But the option, the light coming through a crack, the possibility that there could be a different political future of any kind in Russia is something new. We don't know what that would look like. It doesn't necessarily mean peace, democracy, release of political prisoners, and a familiar, normal democratic regime by any means. But there is an inherent unpredictability now in Moscow that has massive implications for Russian people, for Russia, but for everyone around Russia as well.
Let's talk about Wagner Group, because now, of course, we're assuming that some or many of the group are in Belarus. What kind of an impact is that going to have on how NATO views the region? We've already heard about Poland being a little bit worried about that border.
So this is an unusual development. For the most part, Lukashenko has not been, the president of Belarus, Lukashenko has not been an independent actor or a notable actor on the world stage. He's basically been a yes man to Putin, allowing Russia to station troops and other equipment, to train troops in Belarus. But now to have a semi-autonomous figure like Prigozhin in Belarus makes Lukashenko also seem more semi-autonomous, which means it's unclear who is calling all the shots. It is unclear what degree of agency or intentions Lukashenko or Putin or Prigozhin have. But if there are a lot more troops, very skilled and worrisome troops, the Wagner people have been accused of atrocities in Africa, in Syria, in Ukraine. If you have these troops in Belarus so close to NATO borders, this will make it incumbent upon NATO to look very seriously at its borders and to make it unquestionable that any kind of testing of the NATO border in the Baltics or in Poland would immediately fail. And that means sending troops, like Germany has decided to station 4,000 permanent troops in Lithuania. That came after the Prigozhin mutiny. The kind of strong signal, but real fundamental support along the eastern flank will be essential, because we don't know what comes next out of Russia. We don't know the nature of Belarus and Prigozhin and Lukashenko, and we don't want to be caught off guard in any possible scenario.
Kristine Berzina, it's good to talk to you as always, to get your point of view and insight. I appreciate your time. Thank you very much.